Hi, and welcome back to my office. Today, we're going to continue to talk about organizational behavior, and we'll have a new chapter's worth of material. So, there's a lot to cover. Let's get started. In Chapter 6, we're really talking about designing a motivating work environment. Chapter 5 was really about the theories, the concept, and getting our heads around that. And Chapter 6 is really much more about application. How do we apply those theories that we heard? And you'll notice that in the entire book, there's more chapters or space devoted to motivation than anything else. It's the only topic that actually has 2 chapters out of the 15. Let's start by going over the learning objectives. When we're talking about this chapter and what the goals are, there are several, starting with describing the history of job design approaches, understanding how to increase the motivating potential of a job, understanding why goals should be SMART or SMART, setting SMART goals, giving performance feedback effectively and tips around that, as well as describing individual, team, and organization-based incentives that can be used to motivate the workforce. So when thinking about this, a lot of times people really talk about the carrot versus the stick. The carrot are the rewards or the incentives that we might give to an employee, and the stick are really the negatives or the punishment, such as firing somebody or demoting them or docking their pay. So the analogy of the carrot and the stick is something to think about here, because research is clear on which one is more effective most of the time. One of the things I'd like to start off by talking about in this chapter is job specialization. The idea behind job specialization is that we break down jobs into their simplest components. And historically, there were time and motion studies done, and people really thought about in the early 1900s, how can we do everything more efficiently by changing the tools, the order of how we do tasks, and those things became very important to making people more efficient. Today, we really think about it as assigning tasks so each employee performs a select number of them in a repetitive manner. If you think about an assembly line, that's very much an idea of job specialization. You might sit there and screw one bolt into one piece of a car day after day after day. Here's an example of a Ford assembly plant and somebody looking over a bumper as it goes by. But there are a lot of alternatives to job specialization, especially as we've seen work shift from being more mechanical or blue collar and more knowledge work or white collar. And when we think about that, or even at thinking about on the factory floor, there are some things we can do to make work more interesting. We can do job rotation, moving employees from job to job at regular intervals. Many companies, such as Google and Daimler Chrysler, have very specific programs, 2-year rotations, where individuals rotate from job to job and location to location to really learn all about the business, with the idea that especially in those 2 examples, they are management trainees and are going to go into a high-level position when they're done. So job rotation is simply the idea that you do more than just one job. You rotate through several so you understand the full business. Job enrichment is allowing workers more control over how they perform tasks and really allowing them more autonomy and flexibility. Job enlargement is expanding the tasks performed by employees to add more variety. All of these sound great, and all of them can be effective. But as you might imagine, they can also create more stress and more demands. So job enlargement, if it becomes too much or is because of downsizing, unwanted job enlargement, something that added more variety and stimulated employees, can actually become a huge negative and decrement to their performance. So when thinking about any of these, really thinking about a balance is key. Job characteristics model is very useful in thinking about how we design jobs. The idea behind the model is simple. There are core job characteristics, 5 of them: skill variety, task identity, task significance, autonomy, and feedback. So let's take a moment to think about each of those. Skill variety is the idea that you're doing a number of different skills, or number of different skills are demanded of you to do your job. Task identity is the idea that you're involved with the work from beginning to end, and you identify with the work itself. Task significance is something that you find quite meaningful. Autonomy, having independence and the ability to create your own direction. And feedback. Feedback can be from a lot of different sources. It might be from feedback when you present information to other people. It might be customer feedback. It might be the ability to ask peers what they think and incorporate that. But regardless, feedback is really an important part of the core job characteristics. We think about jobs, they vary quite a bit on these dimensions. And the theory says that these 5 factors are going to influence us and how motivated we are because of how meaningful we then feel our work is, how much responsibility we feel we have, and our knowledge of the results. And that these things mediate between the core job characteristics and outcomes, such as motivation, as we've talked about, and performance, satisfaction, absenteeism, and turnover. The actual math that is predicted behind the motivational potential scale, the MPS, is that you add skill variety, task identity, and task significance and divide by 3, and then you multiply that by autonomy and feedback. So by definition, autonomy and feedback are more meaningful or have a higher ability to influence the MPS.
All right, so we've covered the theory. Organizational behavior has a lot of theory. And what I found, though, is really bringing it home and thinking about the application makes it more effective for students retaining the information long term. So with that, let's get into some application.
All right, let's think about a toolbox. How can you get more feedback? Because we know it's really critically important for the job characteristics model. Research says over and over again how important that feedback is. So, how do you get it? You seek it. Let's talk about some of this. If you're not receiving enough feedback on the job, it's better to seek it instead of trying to guess how you're doing. As you do this, be genuine in your desire to learn. Develop a good relationship with your manager. It's one of the things that matters universally throughout the world of work. Consider finding trustworthy peers who you can share information with regarding your performance and ask for feedback. And be gracious when you receive feedback. Imagine a situation where you ask for feedback, someone offers it, and then you get upset about the feedback that's been given. The next time you go to ask them for feedback, how honest do you think they're going to be? I see this over and over again in the world of work as well as with students. So if you ask for feedback, you want to be gracious and incorporate it into your schema. How can you get feedback about a product and not take it personally? Those are some great tips, and I really encourage you to think about this OB toolbox as something you can use today and forever to make you more effective in your relationships and at work. Empowerment. Empowerment is another important application of motivation. There are 2 types. Structural empowerment sounds somewhat similar to task characteristics. Here we're thinking through where you are in the organization. Do you have decision authority? What leadership styles are around? What's the structure of the organization? How much access do you have to information? And what's the organizational climate? And all of those things are predicted, and research shows influence felt empowerment. Again, how meaningful we feel our work is, how confident we are about performing our job, how much discretion and autonomy we feel we have at work. We know that autonomy is one of the key drivers of life satisfaction, the ability to influence how the company operates. So those are factors that are associated with felt empowerment, and how we design our organizations and how we interact with each other can influence that greatly. Let's get into some discussion and reflection questions here. Is job rotation suitable to just lower level employees, or is it possible to use it at higher levels in the organization? What do you think about that, and why? What is the difference between job enlargement and job enrichment? Which of these approaches is more useful in dealing with the boredom and monotony of job specialization? Consider a job you held in the past. Can you analyze that job using the framework of the job characteristics model? In other words, was it high, medium, or low on each of those factors? Does a job with a high MPM, motivation potential, motivate all employees? And under which conditions is the model less successful in motivating employees? And finally, how would you increase the empowerment level of employees if you were in charge? All of these are important reflections on how we might apply these on the job today and into the future.
Okay, at this point we've covered theory. There's a lot of theory in organizational behavior. But now I want to get right down to application because we know that helps students be more effective.
What we know from research is there are 5 things we can do to really think about how to best empower employees. We can change the company structure so employees have more power on their jobs. Again, here you want to make sure you have the right employees. You've selected them appropriately and they're well trained and they're aligned with the vision. But if so, you should really be able to give them more power. You also want to provide employees with access to information about things that affect their work. You want to make sure that they know how to perform their jobs. You want to make sure you don't take away employee power because we know that is so important. And finally, you want to instill a climate of empowerment where managers do not routinely step in and take over, even if that means letting employees make mistakes.
All right, at this point, we've covered that material, and we're going to change topics. If you need to go back and read the textbook or think about this lecture and rewind a little bit, feel free to do that or pause at this point. If you're ready to move on, so am I. Here we go.
Goal-setting theory. It's one of the most influential and practical methods that's ever been introduced for motivation. So there was a study to see which was the most important of the motivation theories. There were 73, so imagine how many more we could have presented in this textbook. And they were supported in 1,000 studies, and it's used by thousands of organizations. So really, I have to say that of everything, this can be one of the most effective things in your personal life and at work. It's limited to some degree in the scope, but it's a thing that we know over and over again works in a variety of settings. Let's figure out a little bit more about why and how. So you may have heard the acronym SMART before, S-M-A-R-T, something that's helpful in helping you remember what the different pieces are. The S stands for specific, M for measurable, A for aggressive, R for realistic, and T for time-bound. So what we know about goal-setting theory is that if we just say generally to people, do your best, it's much less effective than if we tell them a specific goal. And if you think about it, it makes sense. While we as children might have been told this, or we might say this to people around us, just do your best, it'll be okay, that's all you can give. It isn't very specific, and it doesn't seem to help motivate people as much as a specific goal. It might be quite challenging or aggressive, but as long as it's realistic, it's something that we can imagine doing. We can look at how measurable and time-bound it is. So we can say we're going to get there within this amount of time, and this is how we'll know if we've succeeded. So really, again, thinking about SMART as aspects that will help you be effective in setting your goals. So why do SMART goals motivate? Well, a variety of things that I implied on the last slide. First, they energize you towards something. And which direction? It gives you a direction because it's measurable and you've been specific. It provides challenge because it's aggressive. We know that it's a very challenging and aggressive goal. And it helps you to think outside the box. How might I do something different than I've ever done before in this amount of time? So it actually is something that can be quite motivating to individuals. And we see this again and again and again. Management by objectives is an offshoot of goal setting. It's not the same thing, but we can use corporate strategy to set company-wide goals. From there, they determine team and department level goals, collaboratively set individual level goals that align with corporate strategy, develop an action plan, and then periodically review performance and revise goals. In some organizations, such as Google, these are open to everyone. Everyone sees everyone else's goals, and it's something that's not a secret, but helps align everybody into a certain level. So this is a common, whether or not they call it management by objectives, a common thing that we'll see in some of the best organizations in the world. So let's follow up with the discussion on some of these points. Have you ever had an experience with goals? Can you explain how goal setting affected your motivation and your performance? In other words, in your experience, was goal setting as effective as I'm saying it was? If not, can you think of any reasons why based on what we've discussed here? Can you give an example of a SMART goal now that we've talked about it, making sure that you have all the components? If a manager tells you to sell as much as you can, is this goal likely to be effective? Why or why not, based on our discussion? How would you ensure that employees are committed to the goals set for them? This can be a challenge in the application. Next up, we're talking about performance appraisal. We know that many companies have formal company-wide processes of providing feedback to employees. And when you think about motivation, performance appraisals can be one of those dissatisfiers that we talked about from Hertzberg's two-factor theory. Some people can get pretty excited about the feedback they get at a performance appraisal. On the other hand, a lot of things can go wrong. Before we get to that, though, performance appraisal has a number of questions and variability in how it's done. So questions such as, how often? Is this done weekly? Is this once a year, twice a year, quarterly? What is the purpose? Is this developmental to help you be even better at what you do? Or is it evaluative to try and figure out whether or not you'll get a bonus this year? What components make an effective system and who is the rater? In thinking through a performance appraisal, all of these factors matter.
Okay, so we've covered the topic, but what I'd like to do is spend a little bit more time delving deeper with specific examples. Let's go ahead and do that right now.
Let's go through an OB toolbox about conducting an effective performance appraisal meeting. You may have done this before, or this might be something new to consider, but hopefully someday you'll be in a situation where you can do this to the best of your ability. So before the meeting, you want to ask the person to complete a self-appraisal. If it's a very formal process, that's fine. If it's very informal and they're just giving you some feedback about how they think they've done, this is really an important part of them feeling that there's procedural justice. You yourself want to complete the performance appraisal form. You want to try and avoid biases, such as recency bias. So perhaps something went terribly wrong for this employee recently, but the rest of the entire year that you're rating went very well. That's something you want to really make sure that you're thinking about. And handle the logistics of how this will get done. During the meeting where you'll be discussing that and giving feedback, you want to be sure to recognize effective performance. For sure, you don't want to start the meeting with a criticism. You want to give employees lots of opportunities to talk, show empathy and support, and we know goal setting is powerful and matters, so set goals and create an action plan as part of the performance appraisal process. We talked a little bit about bias in that last situation. There's also bias that can come from the positive side, like liking, or leniency, giving everyone a high score, or stereotypes can really impinge onto the process. Any of those can lead to an unfair appraisal, and there's a lot of research out there about this. So the best thing you can do is think about what's going on, what you think the true score is, and think about ways to avoid bias in performance appraisals. Keeping good notes along the way and really checking yourself. And maybe considering a 360 where others will also be rating this employee. Let's discuss and reflect a little bit at this point. So what do you think are the advantages and disadvantages of using only supervisors as a rater? Same thing with peers, subordinates, and customers as raters. 360-degree feedback is popular, but it's not without its pros and cons. What are some of those? Do you believe that self-appraisals are valid? Why would it be helpful to add self-appraisals to the appraisal process? Can you think of any downsides to using them? Some recommend that performance appraisals be abolished altogether. What do you think about this approach, and what are the downsides of eliminating appraisals? If your objective is to minimize the effects of rater biases, what type of appraisal system would you design, and why? And finally, we're getting to performance incentives. So I'm not going to get into all of them in this lecture overview, but I am going to talk about what they are and what's covered in this chapter. There's the piece rate system, individual bonuses, merit pay, sales commission, awards, team bonuses, gain sharing, profit sharing, and stock options. Many things associated with how much people are paid or the rewards or incentives they receive. In thinking about sales commissions, properly designed commissions are widely used to motivate sales employees. So it can be a blend of straight salary and commissions, and you want to balance that to achieve optimal sales volume, profitability, and customer satisfaction. And the other thing is you want to reward long-term outcomes, not just short-term sales that are returned 2 months later.
All right, that covers our material for today, and we're wrapping things up. Please take some time to think about what we've covered and how you can apply it in your life. Doing so will make you more effective in all aspects. Thanks a lot, and have a great day.